David Chen stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his navy blue tie for the fifth time that morning. At 32, he was about to become the youngest district attorney in the city's history, but nobody knew that yet. His dark eyes studied his reflection, a crisp white shirt, perfectly pressed suit, and not a single black hair out of place. Everything had to be perfect, especially now. 3 weeks. That's how long he had to keep this secret. The mayor had specifically requested that the announcement be kept under wraps until the official ceremony. David respected that, even though keeping quiet about the biggest achievement of his career was proving to be harder than any case he ever handled. As he walked through the bustling streets of downtown, David couldn't help but smile. 10 years ago, he'd been a fresh-faced law school graduate, working late nights and weekends at Johnson & Myers law firm. Now he was still there, but as their youngest partner, having won more cases than anyone in the firm's history. "Morning, Mr. Chen," called out Mary, the elderly coffee cart vendor who'd been serving him his daily brew for the past decade. She already had his order ready: black coffee, no sugar. "Mary, how many times do I have to tell you?" "It's David," he chuckled, handing her a $5 bill and refusing the change as always. "Not a chance, Mr. Chen. You're too important for first names now," she winked, somehow knowing more than she let on. David wondered if the news had leaked already. At the office, David's secretary Jennifer rushed up to him with a stack of files. "3 new cases came in this morning," she said, falling into step beside him, "and Mr. Johnson wants to see you in his office right away." David nodded, taking the files. "Thanks, Jen. Any hints about what the old man wants?" "None," she shrugged. "But he's been pacing since 8 o'clock. Inside his corner office, David set down his coffee and the files, taking a moment to appreciate the view of the city skyline. His office walls were lined with law books and framed newspaper clippings of his biggest wins. The latest one featured his successful prosecution of a corrupt business tycoon who'd been stealing from employee pension funds. Before he could settle in, his phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Don't forget dinner tonight. Your father's making your favorite dumplings." David smiled. His parents had immigrated from China 30 years ago with nothing but dreams and determination. His father had worked as a dishwasher while his mother cleaned houses, saving every penny to give him a better life. When he told them about the district attorney appointment last week, his mother had cried, and his father had hugged him for the first time in years. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out. Richard Johnson, the firm's founding partner, walked in. At 70, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he looked every bit the distinguished lawyer he was. "David, my boy," he said, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." David gestured to the chair across from his desk. "What's on your mind, Richard?" "Word on the street is that the mayor's announcing a new district attorney soon," Johnson said, studying David's face carefully. "Wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" David maintained his poker face, the same one that had won him countless trials. "You know how rumors are in this city, Richard. Everyone's always whispering about something." Johnson laughed, shaking his head. "You can't fool an old fox, son. I taught you everything you know about courtroom faces." He leaned forward. "The partners and I couldn't be prouder, though we'll miss having our star lawyer around." David's eyes widened. "How did you?" "I've been in this business for 45 years, kid. I have my sources." Johnson stood up, straightening his jacket. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me, but you might want to tell Jennifer soon. She's been worried sick thinking you're leaving us for another firm." As Johnson headed for the door, he turned back. "Oh, and David, you're going to make one hell of a DA." Left alone in his office, David let out a long breath. 3 more weeks of keeping this secret felt like an eternity, but he had plans, big plans. The city's justice system needed cleaning up, and he'd seen enough corruption during his time as a lawyer to know exactly where to start. Little did he know, at that very moment, 3 corrupt detectives were gathering in a dimly lit bar across town, plotting something that would turn his world upside down and test everything he stood for. In a dimly lit corner of O'Malley's bar, 3 detectives huddled around a scratched wooden table, their badges hidden beneath leather jackets. Detective Thompson, a burly man with graying temples, took a long sip of his whiskey while his partners, Rivera and Walsh, watched the door nervously. $100,000, Thompson whispered, sliding his phone across the table. The bank account screenshot made Rivera's eyes widen. That's 33,000 each, boys. All we have to do is frame someone for corporate theft. Detective Rivera, the youngest of the three at 40, ran his fingers through his dark hair. Who's the target? Businessman named Marcus Sterling wants us to set someone up, Thompson explained. He lost a big case last month, employee pension fraud. Now he wants revenge on the lawyer who took him down. Walsh, a tall man with cold blue eyes, leaned forward. David Chen? That hotshot from Johnson and Myers. He let out a low whistle. That's risky, Thompson. Kid's got a spotless reputation. That's exactly why it's perfect, Thompson grinned. Nobody expects the golden boy to be dirty. Plus, Sterling's got Judge Harrison in his pocket. You know the judge's gambling debts are through the roof. The bartender approached their table, but Thompson waved him away. They couldn't risk being overheard. I've got the documents ready, Rivera said quietly. Fake bank statements showing Chen taking bribes from Sterling's competitors. Forged emails discussing insider trading. Even created an offshore account in his name. Thompson nodded approvingly. Walsh, what about the physical evidence? Got a spare key to his apartment from the building manager, Walsh smirked. Slipped him a few hundred. Tomorrow night, Chen's got a dinner with his parents. Place will be empty. We plant the documents, add some cash with marked bills, maybe a burner phone with incriminating texts. The three detectives had been running schemes like this for years, but never anything this big. Usually, they stuck to planting evidence on small-time criminals who deserved it anyway. This was different. This was framing an innocent man. Judge Harrison's on board, Rivera asked, finishing his beer. Thompson pulled out another phone, a prepaid one they used for their dirty work. Called him this morning. He's desperate enough. 50 grand to make sure Chen goes down. They'll fast-track the case, deny bail, the works. What if Chen fights back? Walsh wondered. Kid's smart. He's won every major case he's handled. That's the beauty of it, Thompson explained. Sterling's got friends in high places. Once we arrest Chen, this firm will drop him like a hot potato. No lawyer will want to touch his case, and with Harrison presiding, he made a slashing motion across his throat. Rivera shifted uncomfortably. Still feels wrong. Chen's not like our usual targets. Having a conscience now, Rivera? Thompson scoffed. Remember that new boat you wanted? This is your ticket. Besides, Chen's been a thorn in our side for years, always poking around corruption cases, asking too many questions about police conduct. Walsh checked his watch. We should move. Got the search warrant ready for Friday. Judge Peterson owes me a favor. He'll sign it without looking too close. They spent the next hour going over their plan in detail. Thompson would handle the judge and the warrant. Rivera would plant the financial evidence. Walsh would coordinate the raid on Chen's apartment. As they prepared to leave, Sterling himself walked into the bar. The businessman, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed old money, nodded supply at Thompson before taking a seat at the far end of the bar. Showtime? Thompson muttered. He walked over to Sterling while Rivera and Walsh slipped out the back door. Everything set? Sterling asked quietly, not looking at Thompson. Friday morning, Thompson confirmed. Chen won't know what hit him. Sterling smiled coldly. Good, that self-righteous bastard cost me everything. Time he learned how the real world works. Neither Sterling nor the corrupt detectives realized they were playing with fire. They didn't know that David Chen was about to become their boss. They couldn't have imagined that their perfect plan would soon blow up in their faces in the most spectacular way possible. As Thompson left the bar, he felt confident. This would be their biggest score yet, but in the back of his mind, a small voice warned him that David Chen wasn't like their other victims. This time, they might have chosen the wrong target. The next evening, David Chen's apartment building stood quiet against the darkening sky. Detective Walsh watched from his unmarked car as David left with his parents, right on schedule. As soon as their car turned the corner, he spoke into his radio. Target's clear. Move in. Rivera emerged from another parked car, carrying a black duffel bag. Both detectives wore plain clothes and baseball caps pulled low over their faces. The building manager, Mr. Peterson, was waiting by the service entrance, nervously jingling his keys. Remember, Walsh whispered to the manager, you never saw us. Mr. Peterson nodded quickly, pocketing the thick envelope Walsh handed him. Fifth floor. Apartment 507. Security cameras are off for maintenance. His voice shook slightly. Inside David's apartment, Rivera whistled softly. The place was immaculate, law books carefully arranged on shelves, case files neatly stacked on a glass desk, family photos on the walls. It looked nothing like the homes of the criminals they usually dealt with. "Let's make this quick," Walsh ordered, pulling on latex gloves. "Thompson wants everything in place before midnight." They worked methodically. Rivera planted fake bank statements in David's home office, carefully sliding them between real documents. Walsh hid a burner phone containing manufactured text messages about insider trading behind some books. "Check this out," Rivera called from the bedroom. He was standing by David's closet, holding up an expensive suit. "Guy's doing well for himself." "Focus," Walsh snapped. "Plant the cash in the false bottom of that drawer like we planned." In the kitchen, they left more evidence, a hidden envelope containing photographs that seemed to show David meeting with known criminals. All fake, of course, created by Thompson's contact in digital forensics. Meanwhile, across town, Thompson sat in Judge Harrison's dimly lit office, finalizing their arrangement. "The warrant will come through Peterson," Thompson explained, counting out stacks of bills. "You make sure Chen doesn't get bail. We need him locked up and desperate." Judge Harrison, a thin man with nervous hands, quickly stuffed the money into his briefcase. "What about my protection? If this goes wrong?" "It won't," Thompson assured him. "Chen's going down hard. Sterling's got everything covered. Media, witnesses, even a fake paper trail going back months." Back at the apartment, Walsh and Rivera were adding the final touches. They placed a laptop containing fabricated emails in David's study, making it look hastily hidden behind some law books. "You sure about this?" Rivera asked suddenly, holding a framed photo of David with his parents at his law school graduation. "Guy seems decent." Walsh snatched the photo and put it back. "Getting soft, Rivera? Remember what Thompson said. Chen's been asking too many questions about police corruption. Consider this preventive maintenance." They did one final sweep of the apartment, making sure everything looked untouched. As they left, Mr. Peterson was nowhere to be seen. Smart man, establishing his alibi elsewhere. That night, as David enjoyed dumplings with his parents, completely unaware of what had just happened, the three detectives met again at O'Malley's bar. "Everything's set," Walsh reported, showing photos of the planted evidence on his phone. "Place looks exactly like it did before we went in." Thompson nodded approvingly. "Judge Harrison's on board. Sterling's people have leaked hints to the press about a big corruption scandal brewing. By this time tomorrow, David Chen's perfect reputation will be in shambles." What none of them knew was that David's neighbor, Mrs. Liu, had been walking her dog when they entered the building. She'd noticed the cameras were off, unusual for their security-conscious building. She'd also seen two men she didn't recognize leaving David's floor. Being a cautious woman, she'd taken photos with her phone, thinking something felt wrong. The detectives also didn't know that David had installed his own hidden security system after handling several high-profile cases. Tiny cameras, undetectable and running on a separate system, had recorded everything. But perhaps their biggest oversight was underestimating David Chen himself. They saw him as just another ambitious lawyer, someone who could be easily destroyed by scandal. They didn't realize they were dealing with a man who had spent years building cases against corrupt officials, who had learned to anticipate every move his opponents might make. As Thompson raised his glass in a toast to their perfect plan, he had no idea that their carefully orchestrated scheme was about to lead them straight into a trap of their own making. Friday morning dawned cold and gray. David Chen was in the middle of a meeting with his colleagues when it happened. The glass doors of Johnson and Myers' law firm burst open as Detective Thompson led a team of officers onto the floor, warrant in hand. "David Chen," Thompson announced loudly, his voice carrying across the stunned office. "You're under arrest for corporate fraud, accepting bribes, and tampering with evidence." The entire office froze. Jennifer, David's secretary, dropped her coffee mug, sending ceramic shards skittering across the floor. Through the glass walls of the conference room, everyone watched as Thompson approached, flanked by Rivera and Walsh. David stood calmly, straightening his tie. "What's the meaning of this, detective?" You know exactly what this means. Thompson smirked, pulling out his handcuffs. We have evidence of your dealings with criminal organizations, offshore accounts, and leaked corporate secrets. Richard Johnson, who had been leading the meeting, stepped forward. This is ridiculous. David Chen is one of the most honest lawyers in this city. With all due respect, Mr. Johnson, Walsh cut in, you might want to see what we found in his apartment first. He held up a sealed evidence bag containing the planted documents. David's mind raced. He'd seen the hidden camera footage from his apartment the night before, footage showing Walsh and Rivera planting evidence, but he couldn't reveal that yet, not without compromising everything. I'd like to call my lawyer, David said quietly. Your lawyer? Rivera laughed. You are a lawyer, hotshot. Or were, anyway. Thompson roughly grabbed David's wrists, cuffing them behind his back. The cold metal bit into his skin as the detective made them deliberately tight. David Chen, you have the right to remain silent. Thompson began reading his rights, loud enough for everyone to hear. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Jennifer was crying now. Other lawyers and staff members watched in shocked silence as their star colleague was led away in handcuffs. Through the office windows, David could see news vans already arriving. Someone had tipped them off. At the police station, David was processed like a common criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings confiscated. They put him in an interrogation room, where he sat for hours, refusing to speak without his lawyer present. Finally, his old law school friend and criminal defense attorney, Mike Patterson, arrived. The guards led him into the interrogation room. David, what the hell is going on? Mike whispered, setting down his briefcase. The news is going crazy with this story. Before David could answer, Judge Harrison walked in, followed by Thompson. The judge's face showed no recognition, despite having played golf with David just last month. Mr. Chen, Harrison said coldly, given the severity of the charges and the overwhelming evidence, I'm denying bail. You'll be held in custody until your trial date. Your Honor, Mike protested. My client has no criminal record, deep community ties. Decision's final, Harrison cut him off. Trial begins Monday morning. That's 4 days to prepare your defense, gentlemen. As the judge left, David caught Thompson's satisfied smirk. Everything was happening exactly as they planned, or so they thought. Back in the holding cell, Mike looked at his friend worriedly. David, talk to me. What's really going on here? David glanced at the security camera in the corner, then wrote something on Mike's legal pad. Trust me, don't do anything yet. Monday will change everything. Mike read the note, confusion crossing his face, but he nodded slightly. That evening, David's parents tried to visit him, but were turned away. Through his cell window, he could see news reporters camped outside the jail, their cameras flashing like lightning in the growing darkness. Thompson, Rivera, and Walsh celebrated at O'Malley's bar, congratulating themselves on a perfect operation. Judge Harrison sat alone in his chambers, counting his bribe money and trying to ignore his conscience. None of them knew that David had already set things in motion long before their plan began. None of them realized that his appointment as district attorney wasn't just an honor. It was a weapon he'd been carefully preparing to wield. As night fell over the city, David lay on his hard prison cot, reviewing his own plan step by step. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The corrupt officers, the crooked judge, Sterling, they thought they were destroying him. Instead, they walked right into his trap. In the darkness of his cell, David Chen allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes, the perfect target turns out to be the perfect hunter instead. Saturday morning found David Chen sitting in his jail cell, but he wasn't idle. Through a carefully orchestrated plan set in motion months ago, his trusted network was already working behind the scenes. Sarah John, his childhood friend who now worked as a court clerk, quietly accessed Judge Harrison's financial records. Her hands trembled as she photographed documents showing massive gambling debts and suspicious deposits matching the exact dates of controversial case dismissals. Got it. She texted Mike Patterson, David's lawyer, using a secure messaging app they'd set up weeks ago. Meanwhile, across town, Jennifer, David's loyal secretary, was meeting with an old friend at a small coffee shop far from the courthouse. The friend, Marcus Wong, worked in digital forensics at an independent security firm. These are from David's hidden cameras, Jennifer whispered, sliding a USB drive across the table. He installed them after the pension fraud case, said he had a feeling something might happen. Marcus nodded, pocketing the drive. I'll enhance the footage. If those cops planted evidence, we'll have crystal clear proof. Back in the jail, David received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Liu, his elderly neighbor. The guards watched with disinterest as the small woman spoke to him in rapid Mandarin. I took pictures, she said softly in their native language, making it seem like she was just consoling him. 2 men entering your apartment when you were out. I didn't trust their faces. David's expression remained neutral, but inside, another piece of his puzzle fell into place. Thank you, Auntie Liu, he replied in Mandarin. Send them to Mike Patterson. Across the city, Detective Rivera was starting to feel uneasy. He'd noticed unmarked cars following him, photos being taken from distant windows. When he tried to access certain police files, he found his credentials mysteriously revoked. Something's not right, he told Walsh over a secure line. It's like someone knew we were coming. Walsh dismissed his concerns. You're paranoid. Chen's locked up. Judge Harrison's in our pocket. Sterling's happy. What could go wrong? But things were already unraveling. At the courthouse, a junior clerk noticed Judge Harrison frantically shredding documents in his chambers late at night. She reported it to her supervisor, another member of David's hidden network. By Sunday afternoon, Mike Patterson had assembled a thick folder of evidence. Bank records showing Thompson's sudden wealth. Security footage of Walsh and Rivera entering David's building. Judge Harrison's gambling debts and connection to Sterling. Everything documented, everything verified. It's all here, Mike told David during a private consultation. But why didn't we stop them before they arrested you? David leaned forward, speaking quietly. Because catching them in the act wasn't enough. We needed to expose the whole corrupt system. Tomorrow, everyone will understand why. In his luxurious penthouse, Sterling was celebrating early, pouring expensive champagne. To the fall of David Chen, he toasted with Thompson. Neither man noticed the tiny red light of a recording device hidden in Sterling's prized antique clock. Planted months ago during a routine security system upgrade by a company David had specifically recommended. As Sunday night fell, David's parents received a mysterious package. Inside was a letter from their son, written weeks ago. Don't worry about what happens next. Everything is proceeding as planned. The truth will come out tomorrow. In her small apartment, Sarah Jean finished compiling the last pieces of evidence. Years of corrupt dealings, all documented meticulously. Judge Harrison's bribes, Thompson's illegal operations, Sterling's revenge plot. It was all there. Files are ready, she messaged the secure group chat. Everything's set for tomorrow. David lay on his cell bed, counting the hours. His arrest had made headlines, but tomorrow's revelation would shake the entire justice system. The corrupt officers thought they were so clever, choosing him as their target. They never suspected he'd been investigating them for months, gathering evidence, building a case. Thompson, Rivera, and Walsh had no idea they'd just helped him complete his investigation by playing right into his hands. Judge Harrison didn't know his desperate attempt to pay off gambling debts would be his last corrupt act from the bench. And Sterling, in his arrogance, never imagined his revenge plot would lead to his own downfall. As midnight approached, David closed his eyes, reviewing every detail one last time. Tomorrow, when he walked into that courtroom, everything would change. The trap was set, the evidence was ready, and his new position as district attorney would be the final piece that brought it all crashing down. Monday morning arrived with a buzz of anticipation at the courthouse. The courtroom was packed, reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers all eager to witness the fall of David Chen. Judge Harrison sat at his bench, trying to hide his nervousness behind a mask of stern authority. Detective Thompson stood near the prosecution table, looking smug. Rivera and Walsh sat in the front row, while Sterling watched from the back, a satisfied smile on his face. The air was thick with tension as everyone waited for the defendant to be brought in. All rise, the bailiff called out. Court is now in session. The state versus David Chen, Judge Harrison presiding. The side door opened, but instead of a handcuffed David Chen in prison clothes, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit walked confidently through the main doors of the courtroom. The room fell silent as David strode in, carrying a briefcase, looking perfectly composed. What's going on? Thompson hissed. Where are his cuffs? Why isn't he in custody? Before anyone could answer, the mayor himself entered the courtroom, followed by several high-ranking city officials. He walked to the center of the room and cleared his throat. Before these proceedings begin, the mayor announced, I have an important announcement. As of this morning, I am proud to introduce our city's new district attorney, David Chen. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Harrison's face turned pale. Thompson jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair. Sterling tried to slip out the back door but found it blocked by federal agents. This is impossible, Thompson shouted. He's under arrest. We have evidence. You mean this evidence, Detective? David asked calmly, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of files and a laptop. The same evidence you and your partners planted in my apartment last Thursday night. We have you on video, actually. Would you like to see? The large screen in the courtroom came to life, showing crystal clear footage of Walsh and Rivera planting documents and the burner phone in David's apartment. Mrs. Liu's photos appeared next, showing the detectives entering and leaving the building. Or perhaps, David continued, we should discuss the $100,000 that Mr. Sterling paid you to frame me. He produced bank records showing the transactions. Judge Harrison, I believe you received $50,000 to ensure my conviction. The judge started to rise, but federal agents were already moving toward him. More agents surrounded Thompson, Rivera, and Walsh, while others blocked Sterling's second attempt to escape. This entire case, David announced to the stunned courtroom, was a conspiracy to obstruct justice. For months, my team and I have been gathering evidence of corruption in our justice system. These men simply helped us complete our investigation by carrying out this ill-conceived plot. Mike Patterson stood up from the gallery, holding more files. We have documented proof of 17 other false arrests, 32 cases of evidence tampering, and over $2 million in bribes paid to various officials over the past 5 years. David walked to the center of the courtroom, his voice firm and clear. As my first act as district attorney, I am moving to dismiss all charges against myself and announcing immediate indictments against Detective Thompson, Detective Rivera, Detective Walsh, Judge Harrison, and Marcus Sterling for conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. The reporters were frantically taking notes and photos. Judge Harrison slumped in his chair as federal agents approached with handcuffs. Thompson lunged forward, but was quickly restrained. You set us up, Thompson snarled. You knew we were coming. David smiled slightly. Actually, Detective, you set yourself up. I just made sure someone was watching. As a wise person once said, the perfect target sometimes turns out to be the perfect hunter. The mayor stepped forward again. Bailiff, please remove Judge Harrison from the bench. Judge Martinez will take over these proceedings. As the corrupt officials were led away in handcuffs, David's parents watched proudly from the gallery. Jennifer wiped away tears of joy, while Mike Patterson gathered the evidence files with a satisfied grin. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving David standing alone at the prosecutor's table. He took a moment to let it sink in, not just his victory over corruption, but the beginning of his real work as district attorney. The trap had sprung perfectly, but this was just the beginning. David Chen had a lot of work ahead of him, cleaning up the city's justice system. But for now, he allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Sometimes, justice worked in unexpected ways. The interrogation rooms at the federal building buzzed with activity as the arrested officials faced questioning. Detective Thompson sat alone in room A, his badge and gun confiscated, staring at the mountain of evidence before him. Let's go through this one more time, said FBI Agent Carter, spreading out photographs of the planted evidence. How many cases did you falsify before targeting David Chen? Thompson remained silent, but his confident facade was crumbling. In the next room, Rivera had already started talking, desperate to make a deal. It wasn't just Chen, Rivera confessed, his voice shaking. We've been doing this for years. Thompson had a whole system. Judge Harrison would sign whatever warrants we needed, and Sterling would provide the money through offshore accounts. Walsh, in the third room, had completely broken down. I wanted out months ago, he sobbed. But Thompson said he had dirt on all of us, said we were in too deep to walk away. Meanwhile, David Chen sat in his new office at the district attorney's building, reviewing case files with Mike Patterson. The walls were still bare, waiting for his personal touches, but the desk was already covered with documents. We've identified at least 30 innocent people who were wrongly convicted through their scheme, Mike reported, passing over a thick folder. Some of them have been in prison for years. David's jaw tightened. Make their appeals our top priority. I want them all reviewed by the end of the week. Sarah Zhang knocked on the door, entering with more files. Judge Harrison's records are a goldmine, she said. He wasn't just working with Thompson's team. We found connections to 3 other corrupt detective units. Good work, David nodded. Get these to the FBI task force. And Sarah? Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. Across town, Sterling sat in his luxury penthouse, now under house arrest. His lawyers were desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The recording device in his antique clock had captured every incriminating conversation. They're offering 20 years, his lawyer explained grimly. Given the extent of the corruption and your role as ringleader, it's actually a generous offer. Sterling slumped in his chair, his empire crumbling around him. The revenge plot that was supposed to destroy David Chen had instead destroyed him. Back at the federal building, Judge Harrison had finally cracked under questioning. It started small, he admitted. Just a few favors for Thompson's team. Then Sterling got involved, and suddenly the money was too good to resist. David's parents hosted a small celebration dinner that evening. Their modest home was filled with the people who had helped bring down the corrupt officials: Jennifer, Mike, Sarah, Mrs. Liu, and Marcus Wong from Digital Forensics. To David, Mike raised his glass. The youngest DA in city history, and already cleaning up the streets. But David remained focused. This is just the beginning, he said seriously. Thompson's network went deep. We've only scratched the surface of the corruption in our justice system. Late that night, David returned to his office. The city lights twinkled through his window as he reviewed more case files. His phone buzzed with a message from the FBI. Thompson had finally agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Smart move, David muttered. He knows we'll find everything anyway. Jennifer came in with coffee, despite the late hour. The press is calling you a hero, she said, setting down the cup. They're saying you orchestrated the biggest anti-corruption sting in city history. David shook his head. We're not done yet. Tomorrow, we start reviewing every case Thompson's team ever touched. Every warrant Judge Harrison signed. Every deal Sterling was involved in. And that's why you'll make a great DA, Jennifer smiled. You never stop fighting for justice. As midnight approached, David stood at his window, looking out over the city he'd sworn to protect. The corrupt officers had thought they were choosing an easy target. Instead, they helped him expose a system of corruption that had plagued the city for years. Thompson, Rivera, Walsh, Judge Harrison, and Sterling would face justice. But more importantly, their victims would finally see their wrongful convictions overturned. The system would be cleaned up, one case at a time. David picked up another file, ready to keep working. He had promised to bring change to the city's justice system, and now he had the power to do it. The trap he'd set had worked perfectly, but the real work was just beginning. 1 year later, David Chen stood at the podium in front of City Hall, addressing a crowd of reporters and citizens. Behind him sat rows of people whose wrongful convictions had been overturned thanks to his anti-corruption task force. Today marks the end of the largest corruption investigation in our city's history, David announced, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Former Detective Thompson and his associates have been sentenced. In the prison visiting room, Thompson sat across from an FBI agent, still providing information about other corrupt officials he worked with over the years. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by the tired look of a broken man. Rivera and Walsh had received lighter sentences for their cooperation, but their careers in law enforcement were permanently over. Judge Harrison spent his days in a minimum security facility, teaching legal writing to other inmates. A cruel irony for a man who had once wielded so much power from the bench. Back at City Hall, David continued his speech. But this isn't just about punishments, it's about healing. This week, we welcomed home the last of 37 innocent people who were wrongly imprisoned through this corruption scheme. Each one will receive full compensation and support to rebuild their lives. In the crowd, Mrs. Liu wiped away tears as she watched the young man she'd helped. Next to her, David's parents beamed with pride. Jennifer, now his chief of staff, stood at the side of the stage, coordinating with the press. We've implemented new safeguards, David explained. Every case handled by Thompson's team has been reviewed. We've established an independent oversight committee. And most importantly, we've created a dedicated hotline for reporting police and judicial misconduct. Sarah Jean, recently promoted to head of the oversight committee, nodded in approval. The system they built together was working. Mike Patterson, now a senior prosecutor, stood nearby with a thick folder, more cases ready for review. At his mansion, under house arrest while appealing his sentence, Sterling watched the speech on TV. His empire had crumbled, his reputation destroyed. The revenge plot that was supposed to ruin David Chen had instead exposed decades of corruption. The real heroes, David continued, gesturing to his team, are the people who helped expose this corruption. The court clerks who noticed irregularities, the neighbors who reported suspicious activity, the honest police officers who came forward with information. In her small apartment, Mrs. Liu smiled as she watched the speech on television. Her photos of the corrupt detectives entering David's building had been crucial evidence. She had framed the thank you letter he'd sent her. David held up a new piece of legislation. Today, I'm proud to announce the Integrity and Justice Act, which will provide additional protections for whistleblowers and establish stricter penalties for corruption in law enforcement. The crowd erupted in applause. Among them were several police officers who had helped clean up their department after Thompson's arrest. They wore new badges, symbols of a reformed system. But our work isn't finished, David cautioned. Corruption doesn't disappear overnight. It requires constant vigilance. That's why I'm announcing the formation of a permanent anti-corruption unit within the DA's office. In the federal prison exercise yard, Thompson watched a small TV through the window, seeing his former target announce more reforms. He turned away, unable to watch the final dismantling of everything he'd built. After the speech, David returned to his office, now decorated with framed newspaper articles about the corruption bust and letters from freed inmates. Jennifer brought in his afternoon schedule. The FBI wants to consult with you about similar corruption cases in other cities, she reported. They're calling our operation a model for anti-corruption investigations nationwide. David nodded, picking up a new case file. Good. The more cities we can help clean up, the better. He paused, looking at a photo on his desk, the day he'd been named DA, just before Thompson's team tried to frame him. You know, Jennifer said softly, they thought they were destroying you. Instead, they gave you the perfect opportunity to expose everything. David smiled. Sometimes the best trap is letting your enemies think they're the ones setting it. As evening fell over the city, David stood at his office window, just as he had 1 year ago. But now, when he looked out at the lights below, he saw a different city, one with a justice system slowly healing, rebuilding trust with its citizens, case by case, day by day. The perfect target had become the perfect hunter, and justice had prevailed. But for David Chen, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in his fight for justice.